righty, rolled along on this Monday. Man, feels like every weekend these days there's something going on in the roster world, the football world, the basketball world, the recruiting world. And with that, who better to bring in next but our guy, Mike McAllister. Mike, I don't know if we ever settled the other week if you're working for 247 or 24/7 Sports. I like the sound of 247 better, even if it's wrong. I don't know about you.
I actually do, too. Now, I don't think that I've ever corrected anyone, so whichever one you want to go with is fine. I think technically it's supposed to be 24/7 Sports because obviously 24/7 makes sense, but either way, I don't think it's wrong. I've said both myself. So.
Yeah. 247's got a little vibe to it. I'm kind of feeling it, but and if I'm wrong, I've been wrong for years, so I might as well just continue to be wrong going forward. But man, where to start here? We got a lot going on, Mike. Let's start on the football recruiting front because every week now, more names, Fran Brown, this and that. What do we think of the two verbals today? Let's start with the local kid at the CNS. I apologize. I hope you know better than I had to say his name. Is it Cardier Shepard? I'm not entirely sure how to say his name, but he's a large guy who's coming in to play some O-line.
I believe that's correct. He's 6'7", 300 pounds. I think he's a little bit more of a, down the road type of a guy as opposed to a come in and expect him to start right away. I don't think that's the expectation or the plan, but given his measurables, his size, his raw strength, and some of those traits that you see, someone that you get him into strength and conditioning to refine his body a little bit, you work on him with technique and footwork and those things that, 2 to 3 years down the line could be contributing in a pretty large way if everything goes, according to plan. So a nice pickup. You don't see a lot of 6'7", 300-pounders in central New York. So anytime you got one like that in your backyard that you think has potential to be a Power 5 caliber player, even if it is going to take a little bit of work, when you're Syracuse, that's definitely a guy that you go get.
And they just got another one, locally, Matthew Hahn from CBA a couple of weeks ago. He's not 6'7", but what was he, like 6'5", 290 or something? He's not exactly small. Darian Williams, the wide receiver out of CBA. Well, what are you making, Mike, of the fact that, out of this early collection of players next year, that there are 3 local guys? Is it happenstance that there just happen to be 3 worthy guys in central New York this year? Or is Fran emphasizing this area in a way that, Dino and recent coaches did not?
I think it's a little bit of both. And we know that Fran has preached community since he's taken over as the head coach at Syracuse. That's been a pretty big deal to him, and that extends out to, having relationships with area, local, extended local, even out into Western New York, with all of those football programs. Whether you're offering a bunch of their kids or not, still having that relationship and having them feel like they're part of it is all important, and he has certainly prioritized that. But then usually you don't have the number one kid in New York State in your backyard. And in this recruiting cycle, they do in Darian Williams, the wide receiver. And then you've also got a Power 5 caliber offensive lineman on his same team that had several Power 5 offers. So that wasn't just one where Syracuse has taken a flyer. And then you've got a kid like Shepard who's 6'7", 300 pounds, and you can't really teach that kind of size. So I think it's a little bit of Fran certainly putting a priority on local recruiting, and then also there happens to be more Division I caliber players locally than what we've seen in past cycles.
And I guess what you think of your friend is the hope now, hey, if you like year one, you go and let's make sure we lock down 3, 4, 5, whatever the number ends up being, local guys, that really pays off, that say within the next few years, like if there's a super stud locally, that gives you an early leg up.
It does, and then you think back to when Coach Mack was recruiting, and one of the studs that he landed was Chris Gedney, right, who was the local kid. And if back then you had a local kid who was a stud, and you could kind of keep him a secret a little bit. You can't now. If there's a kid who's 6'5", 260 pounds and can run a 4.6 and has unbelievable ball skills and is a fantastic blocker, he's going to get looks from everybody. If you develop relationships with these local coaches and a recruit like that comes along, that helps you recruit that kid, having those established relationships, because those coaches are going to be in your corner. Largely, they're going to want to see their kids stay local and play local, because then they get to go see him and follow him. And, a lot of the local coaches are Syracuse fans as well, So all of that helps you not only now, but helps you down the line. And I think a lot of the fans, too, locally, when they look and see that, you're bringing in 3 to 5 local prospects in a given recruiting cycle, they look at that and it kind of makes them feel like, the hometown team has a little bit more of that hometown flavor to it. And I think that helps build that community feel amongst the fan base as well.
Yeah, I mean, you said Gads, Tim Green, Scott Schwades. I mean, the list is lengthy from going back. And, guys that came here and then went on. They had awesome careers and, pro careers and the whole thing. We got Mike McAllister with us. We're talking football recruiting right now. The other thing I'm interested in about Shepard and Hahn, and, we're seeing a bunch of these guys, that all of the offensive line recruits are like gigantic human beings. Like there's not a lot of 6'2", 6'3". We're seeing 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". Like Fran's not messing around here when it comes to these O-line recruits.
He's not, and you're starting to see trends, I think, with several positions, not only with offensive line, as you mentioned, that he's looking for that size, that length, and all of those. But he's also looking at, when you start looking at the defensive backs that they've brought in, there's a lot of length there, especially at corner. And then you start looking at the skill positions, wide receiver, running back, and defensive backs, and there's a lot of track stars in there. So he's bringing in a lot of speed. He clearly has certain measurables, certain characteristics that he's looking for at every position, and he's sticking with that. And that means sometimes he's grabbing guys that maybe others think, oh, well, that's a little bit under the radar. I'm surprised they went and grabs that kid. But then at the same time, after they get evaluated, maybe they're not quite a 4-star, but they're a high-end 3-star. They're an 89 instead of a 90, which is a difference between a 3 and a 4. And the difference there is kind of negligible. So they're still getting guys that once they get evaluated are actually pretty highly thought of amongst the recruiting sites. So it's very clear he has a specific plan and a specific characteristics he's looking for, like I said, at every position, and he certainly is sticking to that at the offensive line.
You mentioned track speed, class of 2026 guy who verbal today, a 4-star athlete from Florida. Again, I'm just shooting in the dark here, Mike. I think Izayia. I'm feeling that's Isaiah. It could be a lot of things, but I'm going Isaiah Williams. What do you make of this kid who's verbaling basically 2 years out in front here today?
Yeah, that's what I'm going with as well, as Isaiah Williams. He's an interesting one because he hasn't been evaluated on 24/7 Sports yet. So he's not someone who has any stars for us. But on 3, he's a top 50 overall player,
wow,
a top 5 safety. And what's interesting about him is he's extremely versatile. On 3 has him as a safety. We have him as a linebacker. He could also be an edge, sort of a defensive end type. So he's got a lot of versatility to him. I think he's 6'3", 215, something like that right now, but he's got the potential to grow into multiple positions. He's just a really talented athlete. He's a one-time Louisville commit who backed off of that pledge when they went through their coaching change, and so he's really someone who, it wouldn't surprise me if the big boys in Florida end up coming after him at some point, but certainly, the more big splashes you can make earlier in a recruiting cycle, that helps you for the rest of the recruiting class. Let's even say worst case scenario, you don't end up with Isaiah Williams signing with Syracuse. What if him committing gets you 3 or 4 other guys that are very highly regarded just because they take a second look at Syracuse because of a guy like that committing? That makes him committing early worth it, in my opinion. So, yeah, you got a long way to go until signing day for that recruiting class. A lot of other teams are going to come after him and try to pry him from Syracuse. But, Fran Brown, we know, is able to establish those relationships. And if anyone's going to be able to hang on to a kid like that, it's Fran Brown.
Yeah, and you look at it, the other guy in that class right from a couple weeks ago is Demetrius Samuel. Is kind of a similar build, right, also from Florida. I'm intrigued here because this you had it earlier in your article, Mike. This is the earliest that you found on record that Syracuse has had 2 guys committed, like at this state of the guys. They're sophomores right now. They still have 2 more years of college football. We all knew that, like, the recruiting calendar is in the process of being changed. Like, it's possible by this time next year, they might be able to sign right in June. So, like, if that all goes through, I say only, he might be able to get him signed right in about 14, 15 months as opposed to, waiting almost 2 years to pull this thing off.
Obviously, the earlier you can get guys to sign, the better it is, especially for a school like Syracuse, because then you have less time for other schools to try to pry them away. Now, the one caveat to that I'll say is usually coming down the stretch of a recruiting cycle before the early signing day, right now it's in December, usually you will have a lot of these bigger schools that will sort of, okay, this guy is our priority target. He's a 5-star. He's a high 4-star. Nope, we think he's going somewhere else. All right, who's our backup plan? Oh, it's that guy that's committed to Syracuse. Oh, it's that guy that's committed to Northwestern. And they'll then turn their attention and try to do a late flip. That same situation is going to happen. It's just going to happen in the summer instead of around Christmas time. So it's still going to happen. It's not going to reduce the flips, but it does help a school like Syracuse hang on to some of these guys, the less shorter period of time you have to do so.
Yeah, and I guess it would give you more time to course correct as well in the next 6 months if you're trying to find somebody else after that. Should it go awry for you? We got Mike McAllister with us. The portal is opened yet again for football. Mike, we hop into it again. Somehow Syracuse got a name in the portal today that I don't recall ever hearing this name before. Khalib Gilmore, who was a transfer in, played a couple of games, and then got hurt. It feels like right now, the numbers are close, right, to the 85 for the fall. That is this just making sure numbers are right for the fall and then clear out a few more spaces to maybe bring in another guy, 2 or 3 here in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, and part of that's going to depend on who leaves, right? If you only have a few leave, and I think you're going to start seeing, I know there were several names that weren't on the spring roster, right, that there were some questions on, like, I thought that guy was coming back. Why isn't he on the spring roster? You'll start seeing some of those pop up in the transfer portal, and, you'll probably have a handful more that will decide to leave because after spring they don't like where they think they should be on the depth chart and are going to look for an opportunity for better playing time. But at the same time, anyone that leaves, Syracuse is going to be able to go bring some guys in. Now, it's not going to be as crazy as it was when Fran first took over, where he's bringing in, a dozen and a half guys to really reshape the roster and, find a starting quarterback, and I need some new offensive weapons and those types of things. It's going to be sort of filling out a couple of the spots that you feel are weaknesses. For example, Syracuse goes through spring ball. Let's say they say, guys, we like Enrique Cruz at left tackle, or we're going to move him over to right, but we need another tackle. So they're going to go out and hit the transfer portal and try to find another tackle. Maybe they say, guys, we have a deficiency at defensive tackle. We have a deficiency at defensive end. We need a couple more guys to feel, like we're good depth-wise. Mm-hmm. Then they'll go out and find those guys. Maybe it's another wide receiver. There's a wide receiver from Colorado State who over the weekend tweeted out he's going to be entering the portal. Justice Ross Simmons, who is from Rochester, New York. He's 6'3", 215. He had 700 and some odd yards as a sophomore last year at Colorado State. He's someone that wouldn't surprise me if, Syracuse took a look at out of the portal. So it's really just sort of filling out certain positions, seeing where you have some deficiencies, and if you can find a high-end, starter that can make a real big impact, then obviously that would be a huge benefit to you. But it's really just going to be being selective as opposed to kind of the craziness that we saw the last time around.
Yeah, I don't know how much hibachi will be flying around here in the next few weeks. But, disappointing. That was always fun to hear about. All right, Mike, let's flip to basketball here a little bit. We're just off the weekend with official visits from both Jair Davis and Dakota LeFew. No official anything's out there yet. What's the vibe you're getting? What can we read on the tea leaves after those two visited this weekend?
Well, after they visited, Jair Davis followed Joe Tipton, and he's been on your show a couple of times. Yep. So for those that are unfamiliar, he is sort of known as the graphics guy, right? He works for On3, but a lot of recruits will trust him with their commitment graphics and get him to make one up for them, and they'll sort of announce in tandem with him. So the fact that he followed Joe Tipton and he and Dakota LeFew also followed the guy who runs one of the NIL collectives, I think that's also a positive sign. But, largely I think going into the visit weekend, everyone kind of thought Syracuse was one of, if not the favorite to land both of those guys. There really hasn't been another team linked with Jair Davis as strongly as Syracuse has. So it seems like they're in the driver's seat there. And then with Dakota LeFew, We know that he was supposed to go visit Villanova and Xavier over the next couple of days, so we don't know if he's still going to take those trips and then make a decision. Is he all set and is going to make a decision and not take those visits? Rumblings are that those schools aren't really expecting to get him, but obviously things can change if they do visit. But the thing is, Villanova also got a commitment from a transfer portal point guard. So there's a lot of tea leaves that when you read them all seem to point towards Syracuse being in a good spot. But the one cautionary thing I'll say is it's recruiting. Things are always fluid, and things can go from one team being a heavy favorite to all of a sudden someone else being a heavy favorite in about 30 seconds. So as of right now, it seems like Syracuse is in a good spot for both, but until the official announcements happen, you simply never know.
What's your sense on Davis? I mean, he's a guy at Delaware, good player, 17 points a game. Obviously, a starter there. I look at the Syracuse roster. I see Chris Bell. I see the incoming Donnie Freeman. It would make a lot more sense in my head if he would be coming here to not be a starter, which doesn't always make sense, right, with guys in the portal. How do you shake out all those thoughts when you think about this guy?
It's a good point, and that's kind of why when the initial reports came out that Syracuse had contacted him, didn't make a ton of sense to me. I understood it from a Syracuse perspective. I understood Syracuse saying, we think we've got two really good forwards. We need a third really good forward that can also play the four with Malik not here, and to sort of feel like we have enough depth up front.
Yeah.
So for Syracuse, I completely understood it. From his perspective, most often when someone leaves a smaller school where they're starting and playing a prominent role, it's because they think they're going to go start and play a prominent role at a larger school. So it's not all that often that one goes from a smaller school where they're starting and playing a lot to a larger school where they're accepting a backup role. However, one school that has been able to convince some people to do that is UConn. They are fresh off back-to-back national championships. And they've done that with some portal guys that they've had come in and play a role, even if it wasn't quite as prominent as it was at their previous school. And it's worked for them. If Syracuse can do the same thing with a guy like Jair Davis, I think one that should be very encouraging for Syracuse fans as far as where Syracuse is from an NIL perspective to be able to attract someone who should be able to go find a starting spot somewhere. And if you're able to get a guy like that to come in, and even if he competes with Donnie Freeman and doesn't land the starting spot, being able to come off the bench, still play that role, and not be someone who's complaining about the fact that he's not starting, I think all of that would be extremely positive for where Syracuse basketball is headed in the future. From his perspective, it's an opportunity to come in and play at a big name program, play in front of 20, 30,000 people, a few times a year, and potentially, even if he doesn't start, if he's playing 25 minutes a game and is being productive, give himself a shot to play professionally, whether it's in the NBA or overseas. So from both sides, you can see how it would make sense. And I think Syracuse, the way they're going to pitch it is you come in and compete with Donnie Freeman, and the best guy's going to start, and the other one's still going to play it, though. Yeah,
I mean, realistically, even if you're coming off the bench, I think you're right, Mike. You still got 25, 27 minutes a game. There's a significant role there. All right, last thing quickly. If I'm doing my math right on these basketball scholarships, and man, it's a moving target. If Syracuse gets those two, they'd be at 11 of 13. Do you think Red would be able to utilize those last two in the portal, or is it too much to ask to find multiple guys like that to come in for deep bench roles?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't rule out the fact that they try. Now, if they get LeFew, I'll look at the backcourt first. I think grabbing a backup guard from the portal would be much more difficult because you've got LeFew, you've got Starling, you've still got Cuff there. You, in theory, have a healthy Westry next year. Yeah. And you've got Elijah Moore coming in. That's a lot of guys already. And so to convince a sixth guard to come in and say, maybe we'll find you minutes, that's not all that realistic. So I think most likely you could take a flyer on someone at the high school level that maybe you think is under the radar. There was that kid whose last name was Vic that was kind of going around. Did he commit? Did he not commit? And all that. He's someone who, if Syracuse gets LeFew in the mix, I could see them that sort of becoming a thing and bringing him in as someone who might need a couple of years to develop and then could potentially be someone that contributes for you. From a front court perspective, I know Syracuse, they'd probably love to have another forward of the caliber of Jair Davis to be sort of their fourth forward, maybe someone that can shoot a little bit better from the outside, a little bit closer to Chris Bell from that aspect. But again, you're tough to tell someone to come in and try to be your fourth forward. So, yeah, I think they'll explore it. Maybe they find someone who doesn't find a home. You know, there's 1,700 players in the portal right now. I think only 200 have homes. You know, that's basically about 4 to 5 players per roster across Division I basketball. That's a lot of players. So someone's going to still be available. If you think there's someone that can contribute in some capacity, perhaps late in the process, you try to bring someone in to have them come in and give you some depth. But otherwise, I think this is going to be mostly who you see in the rotation going into next year.
All right. If Brooklyn Vic both turns out to be real and ends up at Syracuse, that would be an electric end to the story. So he is real. We'll see if he can end up to Syracuse.
I just love the name, to be honest with you. I mean,
fantastic.
It sounds like if I was going to go into college basketball 2024 EA Sports and create a recruit to have Syracuse go after, like Brooklyn Vic is someone I could see the EA Sports thing automatically creating as a random name.
Yeah, it's an electric sounding name. So I'm all for him becoming the next member of Syracuse. All right, Mike, always good to chat. I'm sure something crazy will happen in the next minute or two, but we'll check out Mike's Twitter. Stuff's always going on. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
There he is, Mike McAllister of 247 or 24/7 Sports. User's choice, whatever you want. The portal never sleeps. Neither does this hour. Brought to you by our friends at William Mattar. Hurt in a car. Call William Mattar, 444-4444. News is breaking in the Yankees world in the wrong order of when I talked to Brian Cashman today. Oh, dear. I'll tell you what that is next. Brian Cashman conversation coming up next hour. Phone lines open as well. 315-437-7644. Back after this, Q Sports Talk, ESPN Radio.